So let me briefly introduce our panel before we turn to the questions. So on my immediate left is Catherine Marshall, Head of Early Careers at Lloyds Banking Group, and also a member of the Institute for Apprenticeships T-Level panel for financial services together with myself. I'm guessing that Alison Houston is next to you. Hi. So Alison's Head of Professional Development Career Programmes at RBS, leading the bank's work on apprenticeships and professionalism, and I know much else besides. And I'm also very grateful that you're a member of the CVPSB's Professional Standards Committee. Next to Alison is Ian Gallagher, who's Head of Emerging Talent at Santander and also the current chair of the Financial Services Trailblazer Group. And I think you might pick up on some of the bits that Jerry alluded to about revision of standards in a moment. We have Andy Tupman, who's the Emerging Talent Manager at Yorkshire Building Society, which won the National Apprenticeship Service Large Employer of the Year Award at the start of the year, I believe. And Andy, you're also a National Apprenticeship Service Ambassador. Tammy Harwin, I briefly introduced to you earlier. So Tammy is, as well as the lead author of our Insights paper, is a consultant working in the apprenticeship space across a wide range of sectors, including financial services, and you supported the Trailblazer Group in financial services. So I know Tammy will be able to share a lot of insight across different sectors with us too. And finally, on my immediate left is Paul Riseborough, who's Chief Commercial Officer at Metro Bank, one of the first banks to become an apprenticeship provider in its own right. And I think very relevant today, Paul is an Aspen Fellow currently working on a project to bring former prisoners into banking on digital apprenticeship programmes. You might say a little bit more about that later. Paul's also the co-author of Naked Banking, which is not what you might think, but a book nonetheless I can highly recommend. It doesn't have many photos in it. Great. So I'm going to begin by asking each panellist from the banks, and I'll give Tammy your own question. Just three very simple questions to start with. Firstly, can you just give us a very quick overview of the scale and scope of apprenticeship programmes in your organisation? Secondly, can you share an example of good practice that you're particularly proud of? And you get extra points if you choose an example from an organisation other than your own. And thirdly, what's your top priority in terms of improving the way the apprenticeship system and levy currently works? So who shall I pick on? I'm going to pick on Andy first of all, of course.
I guess for us, we are relatively new into the apprenticeship market. We launched our very first scheme in 2016. In the space of 18 months, won the award for Best Newcomer Apprenticeship Scheme. Scale-wise, we are relatively small. So we have 53 new apprentices into our business. We've got around 40 to 50 internal colleagues studying from level 3 to level 7. And I think as well it's a journey in that I would echo the points probably from the earlier panel that said that typically people around my age saw apprentices as the old MDQs, etc., so the baggage that has brought against the new standards hasn't necessarily helped for attracting older people to the apprenticeship. But what I would say is that the shift is definitely there. I'm seeing a lot more graduates who are applying to apprenticeship schemes now. And if I think of our journey, it's gone from 120 applications first year, 280 second year. For this intake, we had 850 just across Yorkshire, which is predominantly Leeds and Bradford. So there is real appetite. I would say schools and colleges are getting much more in tune with apprenticeships and offering that as well.
Great. I think we might let's keep the Yorkshire connection. So Catherine, would you like to kind of go next? Give us an overview of scale and scope, an example of good practice, and then what's your top priority for change?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of scale and scope, since the apprenticeship reforms, we've significantly increased the number of different programmes that we offer across Lloyds Banking Group. So at the start of last year, we had about 10 different programmes, and we now offer 35 different programmes. So we offer the suite of the financial services programmes. We also have quite a significant number in the digital and technology space. We also have the functional areas such as HR, risk, finance, and also the leadership and management. In terms of the scale, last month we enrolled our 1,000th apprentice in 2018. So we're on track for about 1,200 new apprenticeships this year. In terms of some good practice, I think what I'd probably call out is the operating model that we have within Lloyds Banking Group, which really helps us deliver our apprenticeship strategy. So it's having that absolute buy-in from our senior leaders as to the direction of travel with apprenticeships. We have business leads that we work with across the organisation who help spot new opportunities, but also support us in looking at the progression of apprentices on programme. We work very collaboratively with all of our different training providers, which makes a significant difference to us. And also on the whole, we have great support from our line managers supporting colleagues on programme. And I think in terms of your third question around challenge, you've referenced the UK-wide challenge, and that definitely would be our biggest challenge. We operate in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, so therefore we need to have that understanding of how the 4 different funding bodies operate, and we want to have a consistent approach. So regardless of what your postcode is, you should be given the opportunity to do an apprenticeship programme. But obviously that then has quite an impact on our internal training budget, where we might have to privately fund. And if I may, just another one potentially would be around flexibility within the standards. So if there could be some built-in flexibility for employers to determine what do they want to include within a standard, I think that would be really, really useful for us.
Great. Well, maybe we'll come back to that point on flexibility with sort of Ian's hat as the Trailblazer chair in a moment. But with your Santander hat, sort of, Ian, do you want to give us a quick kind of overview of apprenticeship at Santander and an example of good practice, and either from your Santander or Trailblazer perspective, what's your top priority?
Yeah, it's probably similar, kind of in the middle, I suppose, between sort of Andy and Lloyds. Is we didn't have like a history of probably using apprenticeships massively a few years ago, so we'd done probably just a few level 2, MVQ, customer service type ones, probably 3-4 years ago. And with the changes, we sort of looked at the whole apprenticeships from a different mindset, and that was pre-levy we'd started that process. So this is when the funding model changed to the 1/3 and 2/3 model. So we really started our change at that point, and then very quickly afterwards, the funding model changed anyway to the levy. So we'll have about 700 apprentices by the end of this year, very similar across a whole range of schemes. The shift is we started with recruitment of new people in, was where our start point was. So rather than development of existing staff, we started with recruitment of new people. So we felt actually that was in some respects an easier way to start bringing the model in, because from one of the challenges you hear a lot about is obviously the time to develop and the 20% time. It was easier to ring fence that time with brand new people coming into the organisation. So we started that mindset shift with the new populations. So about 80% of our apprentices are new to bank, and then 20% are existing staff. I see that shifting. I think we'll move to more of a 60-40 split over the next kind of 12 months. It's progressively moving that way now. Probably less than half of our apprentices are financial services standards, and I'd say that will probably continue to shrink. I don't think we'll grow massively that way. I think that'll sort of flatline to a certain level. I think our growth will be digital areas, data, project management, business analysts. We're doing more and more of those now. We'll always continue to do the financial services standards. I think it is a question then, probably partly with my hat on and the kind of Trailblazer piece, is the FS standards do need a review, and I think they need to be reviewed collectively because we're built at all different times with different people in the room as part of that build, so that the language is different, the standards are different. So I think we need to collectively look at those, and we've agreed with the IFA to start that process in January. So we're going to start kickstarting that process in January. In terms of good practice, similar to Catherine at Lloyds, I think for me one of the good practices we see in our business is having the right relationship between the apprentice and the apprentice manager. We have a model where we have a centralised team, and then we have business champions that support the model. And our business champions aren't just apprentice related, so our business champions are emerging talent champions, so they help with our graduates, our work experience, and with our apprenticeships. And we have a model across that links all the three together. In terms of changes to the levy, obviously, can we use it UK-wide? Would be very useful. think that's going to be quite a challenge because of the devolved nations. The other bit for me, though, probably slightly different one, is I think we're in a place now where we are doing lots of apprenticeships, but we're in a place where there's a lot of challenges now that suddenly everybody's scaling up apprenticeships. I think there's pressure points now in the supply and demand in the market. So there's not enough suppliers, potentially, to deliver the volume that suddenly we're now asking for. That links into EPA providers. I think there's challenges around what we're expecting now as an employer is a higher probably level of quality of build than maybe where it was 5 or 6 years ago with apprenticeships. We're probably a lot more hands-on with the development of them. So I think one thing for me is, could we use the levy and a percentage of the levy to help with some of that operational side of things? Because now we're scaling up, actually there's a huge amount of an operational engine you need to have in place to manage all of this. And maybe could some of that levy even be used to help maybe some of the providers themselves upscale quicker, because I think our demands are going to be even greater in the future and providers need to stay ahead of that. And I think actually that's going to be quite hard in the market to do that. So how can we help some of the providers to make sure they stay ahead to help us deliver the right apprenticeships?
Well, there's lots we'll pick up there later, I think. So, Alison, sort of a quick overview, top priority, and a challenge as well. I think I know at least one of the challenges has certainly been mentioned by a couple of others.
Yeah, I think there are a few challenges. I guess I don't know how close everyone will be to apprenticeships. I came in fairly new a couple of years ago, so I've been in banking for a long time, but I didn't really fully appreciate apprenticeships or what they were, even though the bank has been running apprenticeships for many years for early careers, so 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and we've kind of maintained that over the last couple of years. But we've grown apprenticeships by about 300% in that time. So I think we'll talk a lot today about some of the challenges. It is actually a fantastic opportunity, and it is a fantastic way to look at not just training people through professional qualifications, which is something that we've done as an organisation and funded for many years. But the big difference for me learning more about apprenticeships was the way that the knowledge, skills and behaviours, particularly in the standards, completely align to our roles. So it's very easy to match banking roles to the standards. And those knowledge, skills, behaviours are effectively saying to an individual, the professional qualification is the knowledge, but have you applied that in role? Have you actually delivered that to the customer? And do you have evidence that you've done that? And then that's accredited by an external organisation. So that is incredibly valuable, both when you're talking about it to individuals about what that could mean for their career, and also when I'm talking to business people about using this to prove both to our regulators and also to our customers that we've got fully professional staff that are accredited in their role. So it's a great opportunity. So we currently, we talk about this as a mountain because we kind of started on the journey 2 years ago, as I said. I think we've just got to base camp in terms of the opportunity that we have here. And although we've grown quite a lot, and we have added a huge number of programmes, so quite similar to Lloyd's, we now have 20 programmes that I cover across a number of themes. So that's banking, HR, risk, also management, leadership, technology, lots of roles that you wouldn't expect naturally in banking. For example, we do a facilities management apprenticeship. So banks have got huge property portfolios, so we have facilities managers. But I guess my view on the piece around are we training people in banking or are we training them in other professions is that actually the world of banking has a number of professions within it. And one of the things that we have to make sure when you're on an apprenticeship programme is that what you're learning is relevant to role. So if you're working in HR, for example, we can't currently use apprenticeship levy funding or put someone in HR onto a chartered banker apprenticeship because they wouldn't be able to demonstrate lending to customers, for example. So these are the rules and regulations that surround apprenticeships that do sometimes constrict how we can use that funding or how we can build capability in the organisation. So most of the programmes that we run just now are at degree level, so level 5, 6 and 7. We do have some of the lower levels, but the way I've structured the programmes is so that if an individual, for example, did a risk apprenticeship programme at level 3, they can then move on to the risk level 6 programme. So we're trying to build learning pathways within the apprenticeship programmes to develop people. So the way that we look at the apprenticeships, and this is kind of a little bit on the good practice as well, is that we have our early career apprenticeships and we talk about apprenticeships in that way. We've also grown our numbers by recruiting people into our frontline branch roles, so we have been using the financial services apprenticeship standards for that. We also have an internal programme for existing staff, and we've branded that differently. Because our original feedback was, especially for older people in the organisation who were doing retraining or wanted to build professional standards through the apprenticeship, they wouldn't consider themselves an apprentice, and just hearing that word, they wouldn't go for that kind of programme. So I really followed the best practice of companies like PwC, who had already done a bit of rebranding in that space. So we currently have early careers, we have our existing kind of external recruitment programmes to the branch network, and we have our professional career development programmes. And that has really worked well in making sure that individuals aren't put off just by the name of the programme. Now, they all know that they're apprentices, and through that we're now changing how people view apprentices, and actually what's been happening in the marketplace, and a lot more news out there about the apprenticeship levy and the fact that it's available to everyone is really helping that. So I think over time we might not need that extra branding, but I do think if you're sitting now wondering how you can sell this to your existing staff or how you can utilise the levy for existing staff, you might want to consider branding. My top priority, I guess, is really around retraining, and I think we've got a huge opportunity to use apprenticeship programmes to reduce redundancies in our organisation. And a part of that means we need to simplify some of the rules around apprenticeships, which I think is what we're going to hear later on. But things around, you've already mentioned, Scotland, England, and the funding in Northern Ireland and Wales, some of the other challenges around that, but just some things that don't make it conducive to older workers. So for example, you're asked your age. Are you in a 16 to 18 age bracket, 19 to 24 age bracket? Now for our average age is 30 at the moment in our apprenticeship programmes, and they constantly question, is this right for me, and why am I being asked these questions? You're asked if you're on benefits, if you're coming off a benefit programme, you're asked everything about yourself as part of the application process. We don't ask our customers when we're lending money the kind of personal questions that we're asking our existing staff who want to go in some of these programmes. And the other potential challenge that we have around simplification is there's a requirement that you have to prove your skills in English and Maths by the end of the programme. Now, most of the people that are working in our organisation who are older have a level of competency. They might struggle to find their certificate, so they have to do an additional qualification in English and Maths. Now, that I absolutely understand why that's important, and I absolutely understand why it'd be relevant for 16 to 18-year-olds. It's not always relevant for an older audience. And some of the processes and systems, we're talking about technology, are really antiquated. And I think that's something we just need to address when we're going through this.
Okay, some great challenges there. Paul, quickly from a metro perspective, sort of apprenticeships, good practice and top priority.
Yeah, we're really enthusiastic. We probably have about 100 rising to 150 next year. Customer-facing roles, facility management, things like that. But also a new MSc that we've developed with Cranfield and the Institute in retail banking and digital banking, which we've worked very hard on to make sure that it's incredibly relevant to what bankers need to know today. Whether that counts as best practice, I'm not sure, but it's certainly something that we're very excited about. I think my top tip probably would just be sponsorship. I think you need sponsorship internally from the top. We're an employer provider. Craig Donaldson, our chief executive, is very active about this, and we've managed I think successfully to remove the sense that an apprenticeship is only for sort of entry-level roles, and very skilled people are going on the MSc as well. So we've kind of removed, if there was a stigma, we've removed, I believe, that stigma. I mean, there's always more we can do. There's more standards we want standards signed off, quicker, etc. But I think bankers have to be very careful about criticising elongated processes, given that we put most of our customers through them. So we generally think it's about engaging, getting on with it, and having a good battery and working out the good standards to use and being entrepreneurial about it.
Great. I think there was a world exclusive there. That's the first time I've heard Metro Bank talk about putting customers through long processes. It's usually fans liking us, isn't it? So yes, we'll make sure that doesn't get back to Craig, shall we? Tammy, you're in a slightly different position, of course. Yeah, but you've got experience across all the sectors. So actually, and perhaps reflecting on some of the points the other panellists have made, are there examples of good practice in other sectors that you're aware of that banking can learn from, perhaps picking up on some of the points around UK-wide approach, utilising the levy more widely, helping with retraining, some of these sort of issues, of course.
I think it's fair to say that actually no sector's really nailed this. There's lots of good practice out there, lots of different models, lots of people using the levy in different ways, and then using the non-levy in different ways. But I think, very much like financial services and banking, there's no one sector that has completely got this right. You will tend to see that there are employers, pockets of a particular sector doing great things and really thinking cleverly and smartly and linking it to their strategies. And then there'll be bits that are not engaged at all or need a lot more support to get where they need to go. So I think it's important to put it out there that there isn't kind of a, one size fits all, and certainly no one's got this all sorted yet. And I think actually I've been doing quite a lot of work in the public sector recently, so I've been supporting a lot of local authorities to grow their apprenticeship programmes, because they have the sort of double whammy of not only having to pay the levy, but they also have the 2.3% public sector target, which is really hard for them actually, in a sort of environment of reducing budgets, lots of reducing workforces linked to that, and actually they've got to try and perform in that. So it's been quite interesting to support them, and you'll be glad to hear actually that I've been using some examples from the financial service sector to them to say, look, it's some fabulous good practice on how you match this to your workforce needs. Because I think one of the things that public sector don't necessarily do that well is plan their workforce, think about future skills needs, those kind of things. And actually there's some really good practice in the financial services sector and some of the banks we've got on the panel today who are actually really linking apprenticeships to their strategies and using them to deliver those in the future, so using them really smartly. So I've been using some of those examples when I've been going out to see the councils. But picking up on some of the points that are both in the paper and that have been picked up today as well, it's clear that flexibility of your individuals that you need and the flexibility that you want from apprenticeships is something that's sort of a theme that keeps coming through. And actually that's a bit of a challenge policy-wide linked to apprenticeships in that they have to be very occupationally specific. So I know there's a wish to make them very flexible, to have those transferable skills there. But that isn't necessarily the way apprenticeships are generally shaped. And something that I picked up on recently, which is a new example that I hadn't heard of before, is that a lot of local councils, local authorities and health services are doing integrated care, health and care apprenticeships. So this is where you've got your local authorities and health sector working together to do rotational apprenticeships, where people are gaining experience in hospitals, community settings, GPs, those kind of things, community-based settings. So they're getting that real flavour and depth of knowledge in what they're doing. And I think that's something potentially that the financial services sector could potentially tap into in some way or another. They tend to use an apprenticeship that's already there, so it's a generic standard that's there for their sector, and they then work with their training providers to give them some bespoke elements to that, perhaps in mental health or some other elements. So I wonder, given how we might be constrained in terms of how flexible the review of standards might be, whether banks could utilise some sort of rotational or broader experience while on the apprenticeships to enable that flexibility and those transferable skills. I know YBS are looking to do some sort of rotational apprenticeship for your front-facing customer staff. So those ideas are out there. So yeah, it feels like that's one example that struck me. It could be something to think about.
Great. Thanks for sharing that with us. So I think that nicely takes us on, Tammy. You talked about how the revision of the standards and what might that look like. Yeah. So I think, Ian, we now need to ask you to put on your other hat as chair of the Trailblazer group. So, first of all, what's your ambition for the revision of the standards? And then perhaps I could ask the other panellists to chip in and say, what would you like to see in that revision? In fact, we could design the standards now, couldn't we? Write it all down and it's done.
Yeah, that would be fantastic to do. I think the key bit is I met with the IFA last week, and it was around. I had many conversations with many people on the panel here, plus other colleagues from other organisations. And there is that desire to have flexibility. There's the desire to probably build them collectively together as well, because I think we've all been involved at different stages probably in the build of these over the last 3 years. And there was different people in the room at different times, so the language is different depending on the standard and when it was written. So I think there's an opportunity now to pull it together. The challenge we've got is logistically doing it, because we're all so busy trying to run our own apprenticeship schemes, is releasing the time to do this collectively. So the IFA have agreed to sort of manage that piece for us. So they're going to send out a session for us to do in January, and then the methodology then is we'll run these as agile sprints. So we will take a session collectively together and we'll work through the rebuild of the standard in a sprint workshop. So we're not going to do death by email and send out the standard, everybody revise a word and revise a word there. We will get in a room and we'll do it collectively. We're going to start with the employees first, just to do some position around how we want to do this to get the buy-in, and then we'll follow up then with having the sprint session where what we want is the employees in the room, and then we want the professional bodies in the room, training providers, endpoint assessors, so collectively we're agreeing what the standard needs to look like going forward. I think the challenge we're going to have in it is around how do we build in flexibility with how we write it, because we all recognise that the pace of change, from this morning, the pace of change of the organisations is so rapid. We need to be able to build it in a way that gives us flex to add in some bespoke elements as we run the programmes. But I suppose the key bit is if the skills and the behaviours, those are the core bits, that the knowledge is predominantly provided through, hopefully, the qualifications that are there. What they were talking about with IFA around is that it's really hard to make small changes once an apprenticeship standard is signed off. So why can't we have some flex that if there's a qualification that we think is relevant or has changed, why can't we just make that change instantly? Why does it need to go back into a committee process to get that through again? Again, that's been taken back, and I think a part of looking at that as part of the digital review that was mentioned this morning. So that there should be flex to say, as long as it's a small change of less than maybe a 10% change of that standard or a 5% change, why can't it just be done instantly? And we then have maybe a lead groups of maybe across actually all the FS sector, different people in the panel here or other representatives to say, I'll take a lead on the risk one, I'll take a lead on the FS level 6, and it's a very quick process then to get a person else take that accountability on behalf of all of us to get that signed up. So that has all been agreed to take that forward. So I think, and the reason for doing this as well is you've probably be mindful and kind of candidly, I think there's a bit of nervousness around caps and what's going to happen with caps. So really I want to get on the front foot so that we're not being done to by ESFA, so we need to review them and what's our caps going to look like, is that we're on the front foot, that we review them collectively first. So then before we get any challenge around caps, and that isn't in plan, so we kind of had a conversation about it last week, but I suspect it will happen at some point in the next 12 months or 18 months. So I think it's advantageous for us to be in the front foot and actually develop it ourselves. And at that point, I think, are the standards that we've got the right standards? Do we need to fundamentally change them? I think we probably do need to do that deep review to actually. We've got 3 or 4 now in FS that probably need a complete revamp and start again because of where we are going to be as a sector in sort of 5 years from now.
So, I mean, first of all, I think we should kind of congratulate you on getting those changes agreed by the Institute. I mean, that's it's really good to see that progress. So very well done. And I'm sure speak about for all the employers and providers and educators and so on in the room to say it's long overdue. So maybe coming to the other panelists then, perhaps on the final point there, just a quick insight. What do you think the balance should be between revision of existing standards versus new standards we need for financial services? I don't know who'd like to go first on that.
I think it's worth setting the context to say there's over 200 standards at the moment. I mean, certainly within banking, I reviewed them all at the outset, and there was about 20 roles in banking that I could map to the standards. Certainly of all the capability requirements that I have internally, all of the standards are within, I'd say, 90% of the requirements that we would have. So it's more tweaks that I'd be looking for rather than completely new standards.
Okay, is that a consensus view of the panel? Does anybody disagree with that view?
No, certainly from our perspective, I think it is just around the revision of the existing standards. I think they do work well for us. I mentioned earlier around that kind of opportunity for flexibility, which I think would be great, and thinking about some of the the higher level standards for some of our more senior leaders. You know, you've got the option of, do you go down the leadership route or do you go down the specialist route? And what would be fantastic is to have that flexibility to bring it together. So you can do risk and compliance but have that element of leadership, you know, rather than having to choose between the two. And I think the other element that it would be great to bring in more is around digital, and having that reflected across all standards for all roles as well.
I feel that I should do a little advert for our colleagues at Bangor University here, because they do offer a new it's a certificate in bank leadership and technology that's funded through the leadership apprenticeship standard route. So that is the first one I'm aware of that covers all that space too. What about what are some of the things you want to see in the new standards? I mean, we've heard earlier this morning about all the importance of digital technology transformation and so on and so forth. You know, clearly when the current standards were written and started to be written, we were only at the beginning of that journey. Paul, you mentioned the MSc in digital and retail banking. Kind of what else do you want to see in some of the perhaps the lower level standards as well?
Probably, I mean, you know, I think it's important that they remain aligned with some of the sort of professional standards that, you know, the Institute advocates as well. I think it'd be quite easy for them to sort of remain too generic in certain circumstances. I mean, I broadly don't think it's a huge issue. I would agree with the panel. We need to sort of tweak them rather than sort of revolution. You know, we've been able to design this MSc course, which is absolutely designed to do what we need our colleagues to be able to do within the existing standards, which suggests that, you know, it's not impossible. But yeah, I would probably just make sure that, you know, with movement and with greater, you know, specifics around certain things, you know, there could be a divergence from that kind of core focus on professionalism, which, you know, as you know, we focus on very heavily at Metro.
I think that's a key point, actually, because the standards themselves detail the knowledge and the skills and the behaviour that an individual needs. So they're effectively learning outcomes. There are a lot of ways that you can tailor those learning outcomes to some of the technical requirements that you have within your organisation. So the way at which you build that skill or a particular behaviour can be tailored to your organisation. So I do think there is a lot of flexibility because they've been structured as learning outcomes and not as particular tasks that individuals have to do.
I do think we have to be mindful of, when you look at a lot of the standards, it says will be reviewed in 2 years. A lot can happen in 2 years. I come from an L&D background. I don't think any programme has ever sat stationary for 2 years. And I think that's particularly for the digital ones as well, is what is being integrated into those apprenticeships, the coding that happens now. Is that going to be the same requirements in 6 months, a year? So there is that part of me that how do we ensure that they are constantly evolving, which is right for the sector or right for the particular kind of apprenticeship that they're looking after, whether it be software development, whether it be network engineering. There is that question of anybody going through the degree apprenticeship, everybody always says, what you learn in year 4 will be obsolete by the time you get into year 1, that will be obsolete by the time you get into year 4. How do we ensure that is exactly the same for the apprenticeship standards?
I guess this links in perhaps the point you were making about where you talked about having the agile approach to developing the standards and then being able to, or the agile sprints in developing the standards, revising the standards, but then also hopefully being able to tweak the 5 or 10%, you know, without having to go through a huge approval process and wait a year for a committee to decide and opine on it. That actually that should be the case. If something changes fairly quickly in the industry, we can get that change in the standard quickly.
It's probably sort of, maybe it's around the governance that we have as a sector now going forward, because these are all built independently with almost like different chairs and things, and I think now we can look at it collectively. So maybe just as a sector, we agree for going forward that we just every quarter actually as a sector review it, and then we can think actually do these tweaks need to be done as regularly as maybe anticipate them being. And in terms of the changes to the standards, it's probably more the digital element, I think, is the bit that it's referenced slightly in the standard. Maybe that is the element that probably needs to be added in more, I think. So when I sort of say about the deep review, it's probably more the review of the technology side. And maybe, candidly, maybe some of the challenges we have then is around the flexibility. I think the flexibility can be there in the standard. Is it sometimes the flexibility we've got with all the different stakeholders that we have then to deliver that? So it's quite challenging to try and get the balance of maybe the professional qualification linked with the training provider to actually what we're trying to achieve as an organisation. So I think there's a commercial element to this, that the training providers are obviously there to be in business, but obviously to support this model, which is fantastic. But to build these programs is a significant investment for the training providers. So I'm very conscious of that we'll all want to have our own version of maybe the same standard, and so if I'm the training provider, I've got to then create maybe 15 versions of what looks like one standard on a piece of paper, and that's probably, I think, where sometimes it's that there's that challenge, I think, between what the employer is trying to achieve now and then what we can get via the kind of training provider network. And because we're in that early, I think we're still relatively early, I think, in this, although it's fantastic. As a financial service sector, we do thousands of apprenticeships and we're really embraced with it. But it's still relatively new, the model of moving to standards and the levy and so on. And so we're probably in a natural place where we're identifying now some of the conflicts or some of the challenges, and it's just how we overcome those and how we continue.
I think, Tammy, you were keen to come in, weren't you, Tammy?
I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to echo what some of the panel have said around the changes to the standards. That actually, when I was talking to people during the research for the Insights paper, actually, most of the standards did have a good fit, but there were obviously elements, and this flexibility and the bringing in the new skills was the real thing. And I think there are ways when that review happens, and it's such good news that they're thinking a bit more about how they're doing that, and that they're giving you the support, because it's a big piece of work reviewing the standards. Having been involved in them with many of the guys in the room, it's a big piece of work, and employers have got day jobs, and actually having that support is really, really important. So hopefully they stand up to that. But in terms of the flexibility, there are ways to word, and it's how you word and write those standards to ensure that they're future-proof, so they're flexibly written, so you do that in a smart way so that you're not reviewing every 5 minutes. And I think we tried to do that with the level 6 and level 7 financial services, that we tried to make them broad and open. And it's not an easy process, but certainly when I was speaking to employers, there was a lot of nervousness about this. They didn't want to end up with something that was worse than what they've got now. They want it to be right, and because there's been a lot of people, not just in this sector, that have had their sort of been bitten by how things have gone through. And I think it's really important to work with the IFA around the professional qualification element of the standards, because they were really hard fought for to get those professional qualifications in some of those standards, and policy around that has evolved over time since they were done. So I think that's just something as well to be really mindful of in the review process, to make sure that they're still squarely there, because they are very important to the sector.
And I guess and actually the professional qualifications are relatively easy to keep up to date. So I know sort of ourselves and CISI and CII are, we're constantly bringing new versions out. The challenge is often to make sure they're then supported via the standards and things.